Hi, this section is on summarizing and describing distributions. This is the second of the two clusters of standards under statistics and probability in 6th grade. Last week was the focus on developing understanding of statistical variability. And when I was looking at trying to chunk these 2 weeks into those two topics separately, I found a lot of overlap in between the two, and you'll find that when you're teaching these standards that it seems like you can't just work on standards 1, 2, and 3 and then switch to standards 4 and 5. They kind of go back and forth and build on each other. So that's why they do overlap a little bit. And so here's the standards that I'm trying to focus on this week on distributions. So number 4, displaying the numerical data in plots, where we discussed this before, that they're called both a line plot and a dot plot. Lots of plots that occur on a number line. And the new thing in grade 6, the histogram, and then the box plot. And then number 5, broken up into several pieces, summarize numerical data sets in relation to their context. So talking about the number of observations being made when reporting and summarizing all of the results of the data. The number of observations makes a difference in whether what has been noticed is significant or not. Students can talk about, well, they only observed 3 trials, so what can you learn from that? And then B, describing the nature and of the investigation and how it was measured and that kind of thing. Was there accuracy in how data was collected? Like in the frog jumping, how exactly did they measure from the center of the dot, and then was it to the front end of the frog or the back end of the frog, and how do they determine exactly where that frog landed? That kind of thing. There's a lot of different things to report on and discuss when data is collected, and it makes it really important to have students in grade 6 have a chance to make up their own statistical question and develop some data to collect, and some collection method, and have a chance to talk about that. And then part C, giving the measures of center and variability and describing the overall pattern with reference to the context, and putting all of that together in sort of a report. Kind of, this is what I think because of all of the evidence that I see. And then in D, relating the choice of measures of center to the shape of the data and the... this one is the standard that is talking about the choice in whether to use mean or median according to the shape of the data. If it's symmetrical, choosing to use the mean. If it's skewed, choosing then instead to use the median, which is less affected, less pulled to one side by an outlier. And the same thing happens with the measures of variability. The interquartile range being better if there's an outlier, and both the total range of data and the mean absolute deviation, because mean absolute deviation is based on the mean. Those are both skewed or shifted to one side if there is an outlier. So this is where students can talk about that difference in their choices and the reasons for them. So on to the displays of data. The first one here, a dot plot, is used to display data, and this is one that can be a little confusing in using graph paper because the labels of each column really need to line up exactly under that column. So I guess on graph paper we would be labeling in the box in between the lines, and so that the dots could go in the graph paper boxes and not actually on the lines of the graph grid. So it's nice to model that in the beginning so students aren't confused about that. And then the bar graph. This is when data is categorical, and it can be really nice and pretty important to make it clear to students that these bars, this is the case where the bars do not need to touch each other, and that there is no order in the information. Red, blue, green, purple could be listed here in a completely different order. Oh, look, it says categories. I have a typo here. Funny. Okay, moving on to another display. It's not mentioned specifically in the standards, but a lot of times a Venn diagram is pulled in to use in various statistical cases. So here's a Venn diagram talking about cats and dogs. It can be fun to poll students on the number of pets that they have, and look at a graph such as this, where we can see which students have both, which students have neither cats or dogs, and which students have only cats and which students have only dogs. Then the stem and leaf plot. This one is wonderful when showing test scores, and so you see that in this example here. So there's the key describing how this works. So I've got all my 40s lined up in my first year. So 49 is the single piece of data in the 40s. And then there are 3 pieces of data in the 50s here. I've got a 52, a 54, and a 58. I really like the stem and leaf plot. It helps to get students ready for doing a histogram, and it also is another way to very quickly study the shape of the data. You can see by tracing the outside and kind of imagining it turned on its side, you can somewhat see the shape of the data, and there's no gaps here, so I don't see any outliers. So that leads us to the histogram. The histogram is usually a brand new concept for 6th grade, and it can tend to take a lot of practice. And there can be a lot of mistakes found, and it can be difficult for students to make the decisions of how to set up the histogram. How does a student determine the bin size or how wide the interval should be? That kind of depends on the set of data. If we put if we, in this particular case, chose a bin size of 90, then every piece of data would be in the exact same bin. And if we chose a bin size of 2, then it would be so spread out and so flat that we wouldn't see really any shape or information. So having students experiment with different bin sizes on a single set of data and have them decide which tells the best story is a really useful task. Another thing that can be a little confusing is students confuse a histogram with a bar graph, and they tend to put spaces between the bars. The bins need to touch each other. There can't be any spaces between the bars. The only spaces should occur if there is no piece of data, as we see here between the 60 and the 75. Another thing to be really clear is that 0 through just up to 15 is in the first bin here. If we hit actually 15, 15 is the first value that is in the bin from 15 to 30. So students will get really confused. I've got a 15 sitting here. Should it go in the bin before or the bin after? So that's something to clarify. Another thing that I was thinking about in really all of the data displays is that it is incredibly important for the graph to be labeled very clearly. This is minutes to school, so it doesn't happen very often, but there are some circumstances where if it's not very clearly labeled, you can't make heads or tails of the graph, and students just always getting into the practice of labeling very carefully is very important. So also the order matters in this case. Obviously, it's in order from 0 up through 90, from smallest to largest. And the last display that we're going to talk about right now is the box plot. It's also known in some circles as the box and whisker plot. It's a really, really nice summary of data, and it uses the 5-number summary nicely and displays the 5-number summary nicely. We've got using our minimum, median, maximum, and quartiles that we discussed last week to display this data. So the box ends up containing the middle half of our information, and the right and left segments, the top and lower 25% of the data. Now this can get a little confusing because students at this point are really used to comparing things with area, and so a lot of questions and questioning and answering is really important to emphasize that in this tiny little piece here, that 25% of the data is in between those two bars, and that 25% of the data is between these two bars. And so it's not saying that the area is comparable. There's nothing area about this, and it can be a bit confusing. It's just showing how our data spreads apart from each other. The numbers are farther apart in this second box, and they're more crammed together in this first box. So that can be something that needs to be something very emphasized. It has to be labeled clearly with a number line. I tend to actually have students label in addition to what we see here right above the bar, because here I'm not exactly sure, between 0 and 5, what is this value? So I have them typically label the number on the little vertical mark here, and then my median, and so my maximum labeled. So actually labeling some of the numbers on there so we can see them really quickly and clearly. Okay, so that's it for displays of data. I'm going to stop this video now and start another, because I am only allowed, with the program that I've chosen, 15 minutes of record time. So I'll be back with another video in a bit.